So in that instance, he's a little bit exonerated. But on the whole, the rest of the so-called founding fathers were money-grubbing, insanely corporate people who were desperate on grabbing the land. This goes for Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton and a lot of other creatures that we lionize today, and statues are built on them. And they wanted the land. They wanted the land. People know that, you'll always hear, it's a traditional story, the white settlers came and killed off the Indians, and that's about all you hear, like that's the headline. Hey, let's get into detail about it. It's not just about killing off Indians, it's about a wholesale land grab. And the trouble is, though, that those people, in my estimation, and it's quite easy to prove it, and I'm not the only one who said this. There's many alternative people who said this, and there's many mainstream people who said this. If you get the book by Nicholas Hagar called, oh my God, what's it called? The Secret History of America or something. It totally goes into the fact, A Secret Founding of America or something like that. He emphasizes the fact that these so-called American founding fathers and robber barons and basically the elite, the oligarchs, like you say, these people were not just operating autonomously. That's what history books in America put in front of you. That these people, whether they did good or they did bad, were basically just working for themselves. And this is completely not true. What American people have to understand about their history is that these creatures were servants of the British and European crown. This is why Benjamin Franklin had so many connections with France and England. And by the way, this was even whistle-blown by generals. General Lafayette, who was a French general who helped in the War of Independence. In his notes and in his memoirs, you can see this. And he's not the only one. They were alluding to this fact. There was many people who saw this corporate movement about the land grabbing and also the infighting. And all of this led up then to the signing of the Declaration and Constitution, in which the door was left open by these corporate interests. They were very clever. They knew that if they did it openly and they did it in your face, it wouldn't work. In fact, even the way they did it didn't work. There was a lot of resistance to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence from the people of America. So they knew they had to walk very, very gradually, do it very, very slowly, and basically word it in such a way so that illiterate people, and even many literate people, would fall for the talismanic quality, the sort of glowing, iconic quality of these documents, but never give them an idea what's really going on. Throw freedom and liberty at them, make a lot of statements about that, just in the same way as I said earlier that independence and individuality is a threat to most people. Yes, but don't let them know that. Always give in the media many images of the false pseudo versions of independence as a carrot. Well, it's the same thing that happened politically. You put in all sorts of rules and regulations that appear on the surface to give rights to people. But actually what you're doing is that you're not telling them the facts. And one thing I forgot to mention is that these corporations that we're talking about, I believe they did grab the land and they did own it. And since they were themselves basically, how would you say it? They were basically subdivisions of the Russell Trust, better known in America as the Skull and Bones Society, but it's basically, again, the same old British corporate oligarchical system. That meant that from very early on, the land itself, the very land itself, every inch of it, was owned by the British system. And there's many then thinkers who've gone on to try and show connections between the British oligarchical royal system and the Black Venetian system of Italy, thereby tying in at some point with the Roman Catholic Church. That's a whole other sub-study that can be looked into, and people have tried to work on that there's a tie-in between British royalty and the Jesuit system, the whole I would never say the Catholic religion, because that's, again, a complete misgiven understanding. That's a misrepresentation. But these elite Black Venetian families who are behind these surface religions, it's this oligarchical power that moved from Italy through Venice to England, through to Holland, and then finally over to England, and then by way of the Knights Templar over into America. So it's a long process, a very elaborate process. Some of these agents were more skillful than others. Some of them were very bad and openly did things that you could see where their agendas were. And certainly that's the case in later days where they're less likely to hide their affiliations, You can link it back to England of the Round Table organizations that G. Edward Griffin and others have spoken about, the sort of Tavistock Institute, Council on Foreign Relations type institutions. And I'm glad to see that people now are very much up to speed on this. But it goes back before that. It goes way back into these old families of Italy that themselves are connected to even darker groups from Egypt, the Atnists that I speak about, and maybe even further back into the time of Atlantis and the prehistorical periods.
Wow. Breaking this, the Constitution down for America, what would you agree with this, Michael? So essentially, they built this great document. Would they have done this to essentially it would trick the people into a false sense of freedom, and it could possibly or potentially have built one of the greatest nations in the world, because the whole nation meanwhile is thinking they're free, but it's just kind of like this false sense of freedom. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes, it is. And I think, wasn't it Jefferson or somebody who said that the slave works better with the idea of freedom, and this was very much on their minds. You see, it makes more sense when you realize that these oligarchs are a very, very small group. And hitherto, before America got colonized, their job was somewhat easier, because European countries, for the most part, especially in ancient days, or let's say historically, were much smaller. I mean, look at the size of Holland. Look at the size of even northern Italy or Germany. These are not particularly big places. And therefore, a couple of wars, a couple of acts of suppression, and a small military force, you can basically control a feudal society without much problem. And if you siege your barons and you siege your feudal lords in every various territory, it's quite easy. Alsace-Lorraine, Belgium, where the major people are. Even think about Britain, how easy it would have been for the Scots and the Irish to be colonized because of the very short distances. So sending your troops, sending the supplies for those troops, relatively easy, relatively no problem. So they had a much bigger problem when they came to America, because not only may they have failed in their colonizing agenda, but worse, if the people rose up, they may even have a backlash in which these autocratic systems in Europe start to fall. Because remember, every eye was on America. And therefore, if you failed, you might now be in a problem where you have to deal with the backlash of people who in Europe who say, look what the Americans have done. And this actually nearly did happen. We're going to do the same thing and throw your asses out. So they had to work very, very carefully, which is why they didn't continue a military operation on the surface. They tried it. Obviously, it wasn't going to work. They were probably even told that it wouldn't work. And it was only the belligerence of George III and his lunatic predecessors, and when I say lunatic, I mean textbook lunatics. These people were completely insane. So they tried military activity, threw a lot of money around, but it didn't work. You cannot police the whole country. So then the strategy changed, and they sent in then the banks, as we know, the federal system, which eventually did, as you say, create the Constitution, set up the District of Columbia as a state within a state, just like the Vatican is a state within a state, right, in which those people would be exempt. And as long as you have that parasitical org, and it's named Columbia, as Jordan Maxwell and others have said, already should have alerted people, why pick that name of all places? Why even pick the name Virginia, for that matter? It's all English. It's Anglo-Commonwealth situations without an ounce of sovereignty. Yep,
exactly. The thing about the history books, this has always bothered me, because, they're telling our kids in school that Columbus came over and discovered America. Of course, how could you discover America if the Indians were already here? That's something I've always questioned, even since I was a kid. I brought that up to my teacher, and they threw this big fit over it. But I questioned that when I was little. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with Michael Stark.
What makes AMSOIL motorcycle oils so good? Customers say they can actually feel the heat reduction. Shifting becomes smooth and clutches last longer. Throttle response improves, while more power goes to the wheels. AMSOIL Advanced Motorcycle Oils last twice the manufacturer's interval and are guaranteed. When you order through AmericanFreedomRadio.com, 100% of the proceeds go to the network. Try this. Click on the AMSOIL link, look up the motorcycle oils, then download the motorcycle oil white